Good morning and a warm welcome to you to an important conference about a subject that I know is one that all of us are deeply concerned about, which is the situation, particularly of the Rohingya refugee population. I'm Catherine Marshall. I'm at the Berkeley Center, where we are located, which is the co-sponsor of this event, Berkeley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, which of course suggests that one of the questions we always ask is how are the religious dimensions involved? Though that is not the primary focus of this event, it is very much an undercurrent. So welcome to the Berkeley Center, and especially to our co-sponsors, the American International Bangladesh Society, and we will be hearing about them in a moment. And I would also mention the World Faiths Development Dialogue, which is the NGO that I lead that's based here at the Berkeley Center, and Sudipto Roy, who's played a key role in the organization of the event, is also based there. A few housekeeping details. This event is recorded, and the video will be available soon, which means that we reach a much larger audience with events. We're in the post-COVID period where we're somewhere between in-person and online in cyberspace. So we're delighted to have those of you who are here in person, and that we will look forward, though, to welcoming our much wider virtual audience when the video is available. Just as a quick background, we spent a day yesterday reflecting from many perspectives on the Rohingya situation, and particularly, I think, trying to balance the immediate critical issues which face the community, both particularly, I think, in the camps and in outside of Bangladesh, outside of Myanmar, Burma, but also those who are in Burma, Myanmar, and what the solutions are. A very strong theme was nothing about us without us, the vital importance of having, in a meaningful way, the voice of the Rohingya communities involved in any discussion about solutions, both the short-term solutions, but also the longer-term sustainable solutions. I think that was a very powerful message that came out of yesterday. And with that, I will turn over to Ali Riaz, who will be introducing the themes for today, and then I will moderate a discussion. I have urged the panelists to try to stick to 10 minutes, and we'll alert them after that. But the reason for that is so that we can have an exchange among the panelists, and then obviously with the audience here. If you see me being playing that moderator role, that's the purpose. So Ali, and thank you to you. This has been, as we say, a beautiful partnership, and one that we hope will continue.
Thank you, Catherine. It has been a pleasure working with the Center. My name is Ali Riaz. I'm the president of American Institute of Bangladesh Studies. American Institute of Bangladesh Studies is a consortium of higher learning institutions supported by Council of American Overseas Research Centers. We have 28 universities and higher learning institutions who are currently the member institutions of AIBS. We also have partners, those in Bangladesh. There are 25 institutions that are partners of American Institute of Bangladesh Studies. AIBS intends to and have been working towards promoting the Bangladesh studies in the United States and in Bangladesh. Among the things that we do as an American Institute of Bangladesh Studies is that we offer fellowship to US and Bangladeshi scholars for working towards their research. Over the years, we have been able, with the support of KEORC and other sources, to provide these opportunities to our colleagues in the United States, including the faculty who are working towards Bangladesh studies and the graduate students who have been visiting here and working at various institutions. This conference today, as Catherine has rightly pointed out, is a follow-up to yesterday's conversation that has been the whole day session, bringing in various stakeholders to discuss what is the way forward for the Rohingya crisis. As we know all, that more than 6 years have passed since the latest exodus or migration or refugee crisis that Bangladesh is currently experiencing. This is not the first time, but this has become the most protracted one for Bangladesh. We have tried in yesterday's program to look into the various aspects, both domestic and outside, particularly the international aspect of this crisis. Today, this conference is also a follow-up to a conference that we held, American Institute of Bangladesh Studies, with the University of California at Berkeley in 2020 and 2021, right before the COVID actually practically paralyzed the whole world. That conference brought the academics at Berkeley, that is UC Berkeley, and then it was a traveling conference that led the participants, some of them, to this town, that is Washington, D.C., to meet with the policymakers. We met with at Capitol some of the policymakers and their staff. And then that conference actually moved to NYU, that is New York University, where we also had these presentations. This is the second of that series in that sense. Yesterday, we met various stakeholders and looked into various aspects. Today, we have a very distinguished panel of 4 speakers who is going to discuss the Rohingya crisis and particularly looking into the legal and beyond various elements of this crisis. And most importantly, for us, the primary question seems to be, where do we go from here? Because what we're witnessing is increasingly, in a very difficult world, increasingly there are more crises that the world unfortunately experienced, and there seems to be a shift of focus. Today, these 4 speakers that have agreed to and kindly consented and joined us, and we are very proud and very glad on behalf of the American Institute of Bangladesh Studies that they have agreed to speak to you. And as Catherine has already mentioned, this is being recorded, and we hope this would be uploaded in AIBS website as well as at the Berkeley Center's website. This would enable you to listen to this perspective, and we are expecting that you would comment, and please do feel free to contact with us, that is American Institute of Bangladesh Studies. Today we have 4 speakers. Let me introduce them. First is Professor Dina Siddiqui, who is the Secretary of American Institute of Bangladesh Studies, but her primary identity is she's an anthropologist. She's a member of the New York University Society of Fellows, on the advisory board of the Dialectical Anthropology, and on the editorial board of Routledge Women in Asia publications series. She is an advisory council member of the South Asia Feminist Network, Sangat. She has frequently collaborated with the Bangladeshi human rights organization, including Aino Shalish Kendro, Udyog, and Bangladesh Legal and Services Trust, that is PLUST. Our second speaker is Y.Y. Nu. She was a political prisoner in Burma and served 7 years of imprisonment. In 2013, she founded the Women's Peace Network. She has been a valiant fighter against the political oppression, violence, and genocide that plagued women, youth, and marginalized community, especially from the Rakhine State. Nu is currently serving as a visiting scholar with the Human Rights Center at the University of Berkeley, USA. Recently, she served as a fellow at the Center for the Prevention of Genocide U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum. Our third speaker is Razia Sultana. Razia Sultana is a Rohingya feminist activist. She founded Rohingya Women's Welfare Society that provides psychosocial supports to Rohingya women and help their resilience building. Razia was born in Myanmar but was forced to flee Bangladesh and being raised there since. Razia has also been working with Kaladan Press, a local media, since 2016, and she has a number of publications. Razia won 2019 U.S. Women of Courage Award, 2019 American Women for International Understanding Award, and 2019 International Leader Visiting Program by U.S. Department of State. In 2018, she spoke before the UN Security Council. Our last but not least speaker is Arsalan Suleiman. She's a counselor at the Foley Oaks International Litigation and Arbitration Practice, where he represents sovereign states before the International Court of Justice, the International Tribunal for Law of Sea, UN treaty bodies, US courts, and arbitrary tribunals. Arsalan received the 2020 Advocate of the Year award from the NGO Justice for All for his efforts in advising and representing. The Gambia, in its landmark case in the ICJ against Myanmar for the Rohingya genocide, he is representing them too. Arsalan is the US Department of State's former acting special envoy to the organization of OIC as well. With that, I welcome all the speakers and thank them again. Thanks to you for joining us and those who are going to watch this video later. We would like to raise awareness, but most importantly, we need to find a solution to this protracted issue, Rohingyas, and particularly looking into the role of various actors. All of us have a role to play, and we hope this program and others would encourage us to play that role. With that, I leave it to Catherine Marshall. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ali. And thank you so much for the partnership in preparing this event and in trying to take the ideas that are involved and translate them into practice. And with that, I'll turn to Dina.
So I want to begin. Is this working? Yeah, thanks. I want to begin by thanking, but also congratulating the conveners of this symposium, Professor Ali Riaz, Shrudipta Roy, Mohammad Zakaria, and Catherine Marshall in particular. It is quite a feat to bring together such a disparate set of voices, which are often have been on, have opposing perspectives. But the conversations we had yesterday seemed exactly the kind of very difficult dialogues that we have to engage in if we are to move forward. And I found that to be very, very useful. I thought yesterday was really generative and thought-provoking. It wasn't just another symposium. I've been to many of these things on the Rohingya. Yesterday did not feel like one more of this performance of, oh, what shall we do about this crisis? I especially appreciated that the Rohingya participation was substantial and meaningful, not just some token presence, right? And I want to thank my Rohingya sisters for really standing their ground, knowing what they want, all of them. It's really good. It's the pushing us to think about the ethical and moral implications of what we sometimes think of as just practical or strategic or even nationalist defensiveness. I think you reminded us the question of who speaks for the Rohingya community is a critical one to ensure accountability and to find sustainable redress of whatever kind. So thank you. Second, I want to make two things clear. When I'm speaking today, I'm not speaking on behalf of the American Institute of Bangladesh Studies, of which I am on the executive board, very proudly, and I'm very happy AIBS is part of this, has organized this. But I'm speaking as an academic, also as a concerned citizen of Bangladesh. Many of us just have had to force ourselves to think about what it means to be Bangladeshi and have this population here. And that is my entry into what I do know. I'm not an expert. But I speak as an academic, and because I am not a policymaker, I won't have action points. I'm assuming my three wonderful co-panelists will have lots of concrete suggestions. I would like to think of the 10 minutes I have. I thought I had 15, but I'll cut things short. So I hope when you hear me, you'll think of this as part of a slow analysis, the kind of thing one needs to have in the background to really have meaningful interventions require some background material. Okay, so I'm an anthropologist trained to think critically about nationalism, contested identities, the politics of othering, and so on. So first, and I will try to go fast, some thoughts on language and a vocabulary, and please bear with me, don't think that this is not relevant, but especially media and popular narratives of crisis. It's worth remembering, some of you will have heard me say this before, but I think it's worth remembering here too, that what is a crisis for some people is actually an immense opportunity for others. And we see this, not just in the Rohingya crisis, but it's particularly meaningful then to ask, for whom is this a crisis and what counts as a crisis, right? Crisis narratives tend to conjure up these singular catastrophic events that are temporally bounded. They have a beginning, they have an end, and they imply an interruption in the normal everyday flow of life, a disruption of normalcy, an aberration. Now, everyday life was anything but normal for the Rohingya population well before 2017, right? Myanmar never made any secret of its long-term intentions. And I think that's also important to remember as we think about who to turn to help, manage this, this situation. Over the years, before and after the restoration of formal democratic politics, the state, the military, made little effort to hide its explicitly discriminatory and invariably violent policies, from severe limitations on mobility and marriage, the withdrawal, we know all of this, I just, don't want to go into it too much, but withdrawal of healthcare, education, various techniques of dispossessing people of life and property, but also of rape as a weapon of intimidation. 2017 didn't just happen. It was allowed to happen, and the world saw it. And it's remembering, if we're going to do something about it, we have to remember that. So the second thing about crisis is that I want to say clearly, this is a population that has been in crisis for decades. And, we have to ask when we pay attention, when it goes onto the global stage, and for what reasons. And it's not because people suddenly become humanitarian. That's for sure, okay? I have a lot more to say about crisis, which I won't do except to say crisis also allows, crisis discourses also can legitimate a range of projects and logic. So in Europe, the idea that refugees represent a crisis and a threat has legitimated a set of repressive, brutal practices, detention, deportation, and we don't want that to happen in Bangladesh, which I think it is happening a little bit. Okay, the second is the language of the state. Again, and I'll stop talking about language in a minute, but yesterday there was much discussion on repatriation. Now, my work, it's not the most recent work, slow academia, but in 2018, I did some research on the repatriation agreement between Dhaka and Naypyidaw that was carried out on November 23rd, 2013. And I'll just read a little bit of the language is really, really disturbing, quite apart from the national verification cards, which a lot of Rohingya at the time called genocide cards, but skipping, reference to that. The arrangement, this was called the Arrangement on the Return of Displaced Persons from Rakhine State between the governments of Bangladesh and Myanmar, finalized in November 2017, does not mention the word Rohingya in the text or in the title. The replacement terms, displaced persons from Rakhine State or displaced Myanmar residents, embody the slow violence of bureaucracy and everything else that has dogged the Rohingya population. The Burmese authorities' refusal to name the Rohingya and the Bangladesh government's complicity constitutes yet another act of administrative obliteration. And I have a lot of work on the way in which administration and language write out Rohingya subjectivity, and I'll just stop there. But the not naming means returning home is conditional upon renouncing Rohingya selfhood. I won't go into that. So we talked a lot about regime change yesterday too, which also got me thinking about how the text in this assures returnees freedom of movement in conformity with existing laws and regulations. Well, if you know anything about the laws and regulations, I mean, it's existing laws and regulations not only punish mobility, but are at the heart of rendering the Rohingya stateless. And it's very Kafkaesque, okay? Okay, skip. Point 3, the question of religion came up yesterday. As was pointed out, this is not a religious struggle in any sense. But the role of majoritarian Bamar Buddhist nationalism is really central in marginalizing, persecuting, murdering, and the expulsion of Rohingya. You can't dismiss it. We have to confront that. The dehumanization was normalized not just by the junta, but in mainstream Burmese society with full Bamar support, right? So the problem is not just the junta, but it is mainstream society. The political mobilization of religious ideologies needs to be explained in this specific historical context. And here, I think we have to get away from methodological nationalism, thinking about only what is happening within the borders of Burma, only what is happening within Bangladesh, but think, at least in this case, between, global and regional connections. So Burma's xenophobic Buddhist nationalism draws on transnational circuits of exchange, in which you have a modern globalized imaginary of Islam as a danger to religion, right? I mean, these Burmese monks are going to Sri Lanka and engaging with the Bodhu Bala Sena. If you know them, Sri Lanka also has its anti-whatever, Islamophobic, whatever you want to call it. Right? There's a fierce anti-Muslim and anti-Christian campaign in Sri Lanka that is tied to campaigns in Thailand, that is tied to campaigns in Myanmar. So if we have to, globalized imaginaries of Islam are translated and localized in a modern context as part of a globalized ontological scare, as somebody called it. I think unveiling this hyper-nationalist narrative is going to be essential. And we can talk more about this I'm skipping. One thing we didn't talk about yesterday enough, I thought, and here, my friend Professor Ali Riaz will smile. I'm going to talk about capitalism and political economy. But I think the question of resource extraction and land grabs, the interest of the military and international capital, we have to really keep in mind why Myanmar, why what was Arakan is so important. There are lots of strategic reasons, and the land grab has been going on. In terms of the junta, I think what is interesting is that it's not simply, somebody asked about other persecuted minorities in Burma yesterday. Well, yes, there's a real connection between these, between what's happening in Arakan. Arakan is the worst, Rakhine is the worst case scenario of what's happening with these smaller groups too, all of whose land is being appropriated in different ways. And I think one of the ways to move forward, and I am not, again, a political scientist or a policymaker, is to try and see those connections among all of these minoritized groups that are under attack and build alliances there, right? I want to say, here is, and as we were talking yesterday, my friend reminded me that not only is the Belt and Road Initiative very important, but now China has something else, something much more specific. I have it here somewhere. I looked it up. CMEC, the China-Myanmar Economic Corridor. All of those things are really important when we're thinking about how to think of how to move beyond this crisis. And here is where I want to talk about the international community, which we again talked about a lot yesterday. This is not an ethical, caring community, and I don't know why we should expect it to be anything else. It's not a question of China is worse than Europe. I would not make that kind of judgment at all. There's a lot of double talk, and I think most people in the global south are quite are not taken in by Euro-American double talk. The militarized Burmese state and society have drawn incredible strength from the silence and inaction, or very selective action, of the international community. Well, okay, one more minute. Political will is not unexpectedly, deeply entangled in considerations of commerce and global political economy. And I have examples of Telenor, not the bad people like China, but the good people like Norway, also not refusing to do certain things. We can't really forget that. All right, so I just want to say one of the things I was thinking of yesterday, and I'll just end here, is that I think we need to let Rohingya tell their own stories in whatever different ways, rather than speaking for and deciding what people might want. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much. Thank you. So we'll turn now to
Thank you very much, Catherine. And I was reminded to speak for 10 minutes, so I have to cut my remark half. So let's see how I can do it. And it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, for joining us yesterday, and those of you who joined in today. I'm very honored to join you all and my fellow speakers. I'm gonna discuss a bit of. I'm gonna focus on the stakeholders involved and their role, and how has the international community responded to Burma's Rohingya situations, and how they could kind of improve, I guess. And then later on, I'm looking forward for your questions and more discussion. So I believe that the prolonged and exacerbating the crisis suggests that the international responses to Rohingya is not truly effective. And situations in Burma, as you all know, and as we discussed yesterday, is drastically deteriorating. Especially the recent WFP's funding shortfall is putting Rohingya refugees in Bangladesh at greater risks of abuses. And a response that is more sustainable than round of temporary ad hoc solution is clearly necessary. While international effort to bring justice to Rohingya are truly commendable, there has been a number of development over the past several years, but they can't be guaranteed to provide justice holistically and swiftly. We have to remember that. Maybe that's unfortunately more a result of the mechanism than the cases themselves. In the same vein, we cannot guarantee that the international justice mechanism at this stage can prosecute the entirety of the crime against the Rohingya. Therefore, I think we really need to step up on the justice game. Moreover, the attempted coup complicated effort to ensure international justice effort truly center on Rohingya. Many in the pro-democracy movement are now counting this effort to also bring justice to their communities and crimes happening in Burma as a whole. And I think that there is a lot that can march together and basically create a more effective justice advocacy and push for a justice mechanism. And despite all of these things develop in processes, we also need, actually, especially in these chaotic situations in Burma, the support for a greater support for the Rohingya community and building the leadership of the Rohingya community. And that can include from political support to the financial material support, etc. We discuss a lot about the focus on the sustainable support to the Rohingya community and civil society in the camps yesterday. With that all being said, I think my focus is actually to highlight on a more comprehensive and coordinated strategy, and which also should be a victim-centered and Rohingya-centered approach. And I'd like to discuss a role of different governments and stakeholders involved in this crisis. First, the governments in host countries. I think it is essential that the governments in host countries such as Bangladesh, Malaysia, India, and so on ensure safety and protections of the Rohingya populations, refugees. That's the most critical thing above all. And especially the host countries should also allow the access to the education, employment, and livelihood for these communities. And Rohingya should also be granted full access of domestic legal mechanisms to ensure that they are able to better protect themselves from crimes by holding the perpetrators accountable. I'm referring to the recent deteriorating security situations in Bangladesh. And it seems to be, for me, talking to many people in India, Bangladesh, and Malaysia especially, there is no access to justice mechanisms for these communities at all. There's no justice mechanism. There were some level of, like, I guess, informal justice mechanisms inside the camps, like through the Maji systems or other traditional system. However, with this recent emergence of the security situations, all of these structures has already been destroyed, and it is not adequate to provide protection to the refugee population. And also, it is critical that the governments address the exclusionary narrative that has been ongoing. The hate speech online is not limited to Bangladesh, but also in Malaysia and especially in India as well. These are the most concerned countries for me, and alarming countries. When I think the leadership matters so much. We must remember that in 2017, when Sheikh Hasina, the prime minister, was welcoming the Rohingya, the entire Bangladeshi citizens followed her leaderships and basically welcomed the Rohingya, and there was little to no hate speech against the Rohingya. But then when there aren't enough effort by the leadership, I mean, I understand there are many other things going on the country. However, we cannot lose sight on this issue. When there aren't enough leaderships on this issue, then now we're seeing a more divisive narrative and hateful narrative towards the refugee community, and which is not helpful for the host countries or the refugee communities. So let me discuss a little bit about the role of other countries. The international community in general need to provide more support and pressure to Bangladesh, especially which is the country hosting the largest populations of the Rohingya, in addressing humanitarian crisis as well as security situation. It is not that we put in all the burden to the Bangladesh, but there should be enough adequate support to the country. But also, I think people need to talk about situations in the camp, and we also need the greater material and financial assistance to address food crisis, and also any assistance in the camps or in other in camps in Bangladesh or other countries must create a channel for the Rohingya to be able to take part and take ownership of their lives in terms of on the humanitarian front to skill, like I guess building their self-reliance and resilience, like including through the skill building activities and trainings, etc. The international community needs more sanctions and arms embargo against the Burmese military, especially we've been calling on this sanctions against the Myanmar oil and gas industry, which create largest revenue to the military. And like I mentioned earlier, that we need a lot more support for the international criminal justice processes and accountability effort, especially to prosecute the entirety of the crimes. I once again, I will reiterate, these processes from the beginning to the end must be consulted with the Rohingya and informed to the Rohingya, and at the same time to implement or to implement those suggestions or those actions, there is a need for a more strategically coordinated effort, because we're seeing the China and Japan and our neighbors are very active. It's not that we hate our neighbors, but based on the record, the human rights and human rights record of this country and the way that they conduct businesses, including involvement in the repatriations and refugee crisis, is quite concerning. So therefore, the rest of the world should not leave the crisis, Rohingya situations, to just China or others in the region. It is important that the U.S. step up and step up in this entire crisis. At the same time, implement the Rohingya genocide determination with a stronger and a more dedicated action to really help Rohingyas from their path out of genocide. These include coordinating with the ASEAN to work on protection, safety issues, and justice and accountability. And they can also include the U.S. Congress actually legislating for the Rohingya genocide. Let me discuss a little bit on the ASEAN role. ASEAN approach to the Rohingya has been extremely disappointing for decades, beyond the 2017 genocide and to this day. In fact, ASEAN Coordinating Center for Humanitarian Aid, the AHA Center, even met the Myanmar junta to discuss the use of discriminatory national verification card recently. However, despite this, I try to stay hopeful for ASEAN. What gives me this hope is the immense effort of ASEAN countries like Malaysia and Indonesia to support the Rohingya and Myanmar. It's time for ASEAN to effectively address the Rohingya crisis, because ASEAN will bear the brunt of it if it doesn't, and they are actually already bearing the brunt, receiving a lot of the refugees, especially in Malaysia and Indonesia and Thailand. The Rohingya crisis is now becoming a serious regional crisis as a result of deteriorating conditions both in Burma and Bangladesh. The 2022 was one of the worst year of the for one of the deadliest sea crossing year for the Rohingya refugees. And for, I mean, we're pushing against the ASEAN. However, ASEAN also need political support from the international community, especially the U.S. government, to address this case immediately. When what ASEAN can do now practically is to deploy search and rescue mission to Rohingya fleeing boat. This will help save life of the Rohingya and ensure those losses are properly documented. Generally, ASEAN need to become a more people and civil society centered body for it truly to be effective. These failure, the failure of 5-point consensus and related measure as a result of the ASEAN inability to engage with its own people, especially civil society. And I'll just briefly go just two other stakeholders, the UN and INGOs, and domestic stakeholders such as the National Unity Government. The UN and INGO must also continue to powerful and sustain advocacy for Rohingya and the Burma. Their work has been crucial in pushing the community situation forward. I'm being very big here. You know, UN is a big one, and there are some good entities such as OACHR or HRC, but not all. And also in INGOs, there's a lot of good INGOs such as Human Rights Watch or Amnesty International, etc. But there are a lot of like unhelpful ones as well. For their work to be more effective, I think the UN and INGOs in general must now confront and respond the reality of the Rohingya refugees. These include the escalating militant group and gang violence in refugee camps. It is essential for those bodies to consult with the Rohingya community when their work has a life-changing impact. At the same time, there are some practical practices I've noticed have been informed about that have prioritized such organizations over Rohingya. I guess lastly, on the UN, we discussed about the Rosenthal report here. I think the questioning about the role of UN in Burma as genocide was occurring is crucial, and to really hold the UN accountable to internally reflect and change within. Lastly, on the domestic actor, I think we have a chance right now. This is an opportunity for us to fix the harm that has been done against the ethnic minorities in Burma, including the Rohingya. I believe that there is a common understanding, and there is a kind of a kind of will, or there's a state of mind that people want to address this. But I hope that if this effort are being inclusive of the Rohingyas community and affected communities, and this can be more effective. So we really, I think that the international community's pressure and a lot of the pro-democracy people involved in the pro-democracy movement and demands on addressing those countries pressing issues such as the violence against Rohingya to their leaderships, including the NUG and NUCC, is crucial. And I hope that this will continue to carry, and we'll be able to address internally this issue as well. Thank you.
And I will start with my recent trafficking tragedies. I'm sure you already know that each year, thousands of desperate Rohingya from the refugee camp in Bangladesh and from inside Myanmar risk their lives to try and reach Malaysia and other countries overland or by sea. You may have heard how they are tricked and abused by traffickers, but you may not know about the horrific abuse they suffer if they are caught by the military authority inside Myanmar. I want to share with you what has been happening in Ratidong Shamala jail in northern Arakan state. If Rohingya women and men are arrested in both of the sea coast, they are sent to jail in Ratidong, where they are sentenced without due process. Those traveling from Myanmar are sentenced 5 years in prison, and those from Bangladesh are sentenced 2 years. We have learned that the jail authority inflicts terrible abuse on Rohingya detainees, whether male or female. They ask them to communicate with their family and demand about 5 lakh Bangladeshi taka, nearby 5,000 US dollar per person to be released. Then the jail authority forced the male Rohingya detained to gang rape the female Rohingya detainees, 6 or 7 men at a time. If the man didn't agree, are beaten sometime to death. It's a deliberate tactic to destroy our people morals, ethics, and dignity, part of the ongoing genocide. Please imagine when these men are released, how will they live with what they have done? Last year, we heard that most of the Rohingya girls from Myanmar released from prison after serving their sentence or after their family had paid money were 6 to 8 months pregnant. They were purposely kept in prison until it was too late to terminate the pregnancy. Those who released from Ratidong Shamala jail have to take NVC card, which directly explain these people are not belong Rakhine State. It is a process. Recently, you may have heard about the 2 boats last in maybe Ramadan sinking in the Andaman Sea, which is start from the Bangladesh camp. One carried 100 Rohingya people from registered refugee camp. Whole people, 100 people, they are relative, they are family, and they're all now in the sea. They are desperate for better life. They stayed in the registered camp because their future, they tried to jump the sea, but at last, no one is served. Again, thank you for arranging this event, but as a human rights activist and humanitarian worker, I want to express my frustration. Are we really making progress by attending so many events where we only discuss whether it is genocide or not and why it is happening? Have we ever thought about future of these people stuck in the Bangladesh camp and inside Myanmar IDP camp? Are we only concerned about the NGO funds or INGO funds and how we can bring the project that only provide people, Rohingya people, only 200 taka, which is issued than not more than $2 for the sake of a project name? It's only create a slave community that only hope for some small amount in the camp. I know the most of our neighboring countries do not support the Rohingya cause. Especially India is the one such a country that is unsupportive of Rohingya refugees. However, in sensitive situation, they have encouraged education for the Rohingya and have give them educational opportunity. This is why we have seen some educated youth in India. Educated people are not easily bystander crimes, and so providing education opportunity is good for the Rohingya community. Education is the pillar of the nation. Education is the only way out to save our people in the long run. But there is no intention to give education to Rohingya youth. We saw the official shutdown of many hundred of self-running schools in the camp. One of our guests said that it is for the security. But my question, what kind of security? Because education only giving the knowledge, maybe it is a misunderstand or misinformation. That's why our school shut down. Myself, I run in more than 80 schools. Still, I run in a basic educational just for elderly women. And we have more than 40,000 teenage youth who are roaming around in the camp without education, and they have no future. I already said trafficking is a worse situation now in the Rohingya community inside of Myanmar or in Bangladesh. Why? You will have to find out why it's happening, why we cannot stop this. Yes, I know there are so many mechanisms to try to stop this, but it is not stop. It's increasing every day. It's not a year or not every day. It's increasing dramatically because the situation inside the camp, because there is a no livelihood, no education, even not hope for repatriation and return. So people are very, very desperate. Every day, each of Rohingya person asking, when will you go back? And I cannot give any answer. But they are willing to go. But there is also another issue because we know in this situation we cannot send these people. We just forcing Bangladesh government and for the repatriation, why we're not starting repatriation. And one thing, China raised this issue, but it is also China's ongoing process because China is the one who always blocked the all kind of repatriation process or return Rohingya in their own country. And without his case, I can say that also another country, India, they are also very not supportive. And last time when the last May, when the delegate came from Oxfordshire in India TV, they are very shockingly, they are asking how Bangladesh repatriate these people. Before they said these people are terrorists, each and every one. They pointed this, even the small children, they are each and every day after the influx, I see because I always open the TV and they not a single positive comment for Rohingya, even for Bangladesh. But now they are so concerned about the repatriation issue, and the purpose is Bangladesh pushing them again in the fire. It is illogical. We have to all together have to work for the repatriation, and it is not impossible for international community because overnight they can solve other, even the Ukraine issue is very valuable now. And there are so many decisions come from the international community, but not for the Rohingya. Not for the Rohingya, yes, because we are not that much resourceful or for our religious purpose, we are not getting this kind of support. But still, I have hope if we all together work, we can stabilize the situation inside the Myanmar. So the junta only control about the region because the whole Myanmar is now fighting each other. It's like a civil war. And sanction is made by sanction is not workable at all because I didn't have to explain. And the serious sanction is seen there. And Myanmar is continuously pushing their own citizens, and they also out of their country. And in the morning, one of the Burmese sisters says, we also just leave our country because we are not able to live over there for our life. They don't like us. And she told me one thing that now we understand what happened. Rohingya have to pay so much This is the largest, and now finally our athletes, not everyone, they understand that what is really happening inside in the room. But now this is time we have to work together and we have to solve the solution. And these people have a future, especially our children. 5 years, now 6 years. Our children is grown up without knowing. To consider, and thank you again about this event. Thank you so much. Ursula.
Well, thank you, Catherine. Thank you to the organizers. I'm very refreshed and welcome the opportunity to be the token male on the panel, which is usually not the case. So it's very welcome and very refreshing to see that. And thank you to my fellow panelists for their really insightful presentations. Razia, your work has always been so important, and I remember reading the reports that you did, related to all of the sexual violence that very important part of the Gambia's case against Myanmar at the ICJ. So thank you for that work, and thank you for Weiwei for your leadership. And as Dina noted, the Rohingya oppression has been going on for decades, and the policies that are part of the genocidal efforts against the Rohingya have been imposed on the Rohingya population in Myanmar for many decades. So when we talk about the crisis, or we talk about the situation as it exists now, it's not just the fact of 1 million or so people living in refugee camps. It's also the fact that you still have 600,000 Rohingya in Myanmar still subjected to these genocidal policies, still in essentially concentration camps, still unable to exercise the rights that all of us take for granted: freedom of movement, freedom of access to livelihoods, freedom to access education and healthcare. All of those are denied to the Rohingya who are remaining in Myanmar at the moment. And those, frankly, that existing impediment, those discriminatory policies, comes into play when we talk about repatriation, because if Rohingya are going back to Myanmar, what are they going back to? Are they going back to concentration camps? Are they going back to essentially open-air prisons? So that's an important area of discussion that certainly has to be top of mind in the repatriation conversation. But that, I think, highlights the importance of justice and accountability, because these policies that have been in existence for decades, the fact that there have been previous instances of campaigns where Myanmar has committed acts of violence and brutality against Rohingya, which has led to many of them having to flee for their lives across the border to Bangladesh. These episodes have happened in the past. And so the clearance operations of 2017 were not unfamiliar. It was a repeat of the past in a way, but a more brutal and a more calculated effort to come to essentially a final solution. There's speeches made by General Min Aung Hlaing talking about how this effort was an effort to finally solve the situation of the Rohingya. And so it's no surprise that the clearance operations of 2017 and 2018 were particularly brutal, involved horrific acts of murder, of sexual violence, of the burning of villages, the burning of people alive in their homes. And soldiers were ordered to kill everyone that they saw, everything that they see or hear. I mean, it was very clearly an effort to exterminate the population in very many ways. And that's why it's so important for there to be an effort to ensure justice and accountability, because the effort to resolve the situation is a multi-track effort. The justice effort is just one part of it, but there's a political effort that's necessary. There's a humanitarian effort that's necessary. There's a regional effort that's necessary with ASEAN, as Weiwei was talking about. All of these efforts are important, and they work together towards what is hopefully the common goal of ensuring the full citizenship rights of the Rohingya people, and lot of this is complicated by the reality of the post-coup context and the fact that we have ongoing acts of violence, ongoing atrocity crimes, crimes against humanity being inflicted upon other populations in Myanmar. But that again, I think reinforces the point that if there were and if there are more concerted efforts to ensure justice and accountability, then perhaps it'll be less likely that the junta feels that they can get away with these types of crimes on an ongoing basis. And so when we talk about justice and accountability, we're talking, of course, about victims' rights, and we're talking about efforts to secure truth as to what happened, and also restitution for the victims. We're also on the accountability front talking about ensuring non-repetition of these types of actions and ensuring that appropriate changes in government policy are made. There is, of course, no chance of there being true justice and accountability within Myanmar itself, within the courts there. We know that with this regime, that type of accountability and justice is illusory within the country. And that's why international justice efforts are so important. And there are several efforts that are underway that are complementary in different respects or that address different elements. The case that I'm involved in as a attorney for the Gambia is at the International Court of Justice. And this is an effort at a state-to-state level to hold Myanmar accountable to its obligations under the Genocide Convention, which it is a party to, and which imposes upon it certain obligations, including the obligation not to commit genocide, to prevent genocide, and to hold accountable those who commit genocide when it occurs. And the Gambia, as a party to this treaty, has the right to hold Myanmar to account to that treaty and those obligations, and that's what it's done with this case. There are other justice mechanisms that have been invoked relating in particular to international criminal responsibility. And so the ICC is involved in an investigation related to crimes that were completed on the territory of Bangladesh. The reason for that being that Myanmar is not a state party to the Rome Statute, and therefore the court itself does not have a direct jurisdiction over the crimes in Myanmar. But because Bangladesh is a party to the Rome Statute, the court has found that it has jurisdiction related to crimes that are completed on that territory. There are also universal jurisdiction efforts underway in countries like Argentina, and Germany, and Turkey, all of which are aimed to hold responsible individuals who committed criminal acts as part of the genocidal acts. So in terms of the Gambia's case, I just want to briefly talk about that because it was not a foregone conclusion that a case like this would be brought. In fact, when the genocidal acts were occurring and the world was horrified by what it was seeing in the media, there was a big push to have various states take action. And unfortunately, there weren't many states that were willing to take action. In fact, there weren't any states that were stepping up to do something about it in terms of concrete legal action or other actions. And unfortunately, at the UN, in the Security Council, Myanmar was protected in many ways by China, which was willing to exercise its veto in order to stymie any Security Council action that might come about. The Gambia's interest in this case honestly came about by chance and by happenstance. Thankfully, in 2016, the Gambia overthrew its longtime dictator and elected a democratic government. Thankfully, as part of that new government in the Gambia, the Attorney General who was appointed was an Attorney General named Abubakar Tambadou, who had spent several years of his life prosecuting atrocity crimes and genocide for the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda. Thankfully, by happenstance, when Bangladesh hosted the 2018 OIC Foreign Ministerial, the Foreign Minister of the Gambia was unable to attend, and in his place, the Justice Minister went. Thankfully, as part of that meeting, Bangladesh had the delegations visit the camps and meet the victims directly. And when Abubakar Tambadou met the victims in the camps, he knew immediately that these were victims of genocide, and he felt that he had to do something about it. And he used the OIC platform as a way to create a committee that would focus on accountability issues. And through that committee, ultimately, the idea of a case under the Genocide Convention was discussed. and the Gambia's interest in that was certainly very clear, and he got the approval of his government to have the Gambia bring this case against Myanmar. And so it was filed in November of 2019, and there have been various phases to that case that I'll try to briefly discuss, because I know I'm probably running up on time. Captain, is that right? Initially, there was, of course, the application initiating the case, and as part of that, there was a request for provisional measures, which is essentially like a request for a restraining order by the court to order Myanmar not to commit further acts of genocide, and the Gambia was successful unanimously in having that order issued by the court in January of 2020. Second phase of the case arose when Myanmar filed what are called preliminary objections. This is essentially an effort by Myanmar to have the case dismissed. And last summer, the court issued its judgment on that request, and it was a 15-1 judgment in favor of the Gambia, rejecting Myanmar's effort to dismiss the case and affirming that the court had jurisdiction to hear this case. So now we're squarely in the merits phase of the case. The Gambia, in October of 2020, had filed its merits brief, its case against Myanmar for genocide, and now Myanmar has due later this month, unless that's moved, it has due its statement of defense in the case, its counter memorial. And once that is filed, there likely will be a second round of written pleadings in order to complete the written phase of the case. And once that's completed, there would be a public hearing on the merits that would be held in The Hague, which would once again create this public opportunity and platform to hold Myanmar as a state accountable for the genocidal acts that it committed against the Rohingya. And I just want to mention in particular that the reason why the ICJ case is so important and why it's different from these other efforts is that it's the only case that can hold Myanmar as a state responsible for its crimes. And if the court finds that Myanmar is responsible for those crimes, it would entail Myanmar having to take certain actions to redress those wrongful acts, including acts of restitution, including, according to the Gambia's submissions, a requirement to ensure that the Rohingya have full citizenship rights, full access to their lands and their properties, and recompensation for the losses that they suffered. I want to just briefly mention, I know I'm probably over time, that this case has been, of course, an effort led by the Gambia, but it has had the support of the 57 members of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation. They've also had the support of several states, including Bangladesh, the United States, and Canada, in terms of efforts to ensure that we have robust evidence to support the case. There have been several states, including Canada, the Netherlands, the UK, and Germany, who indicated their intent to intervene in support of the Gambia in this case, meaning that they would become not parties to the case per se, but they would be intervening parties in order to express their interpretations of the convention in light of their support for the Gambia's case. And all of this, of course, is in parallel to the other important efforts at the political level, at the humanitarian level, to ensure that this crisis is brought to an end. And ultimately, given the political context, I think, which has certainly complicated things, justice and accountability is an essential element, not only for the Rohingya situation, but for the future of Myanmar itself. Because Myanmar and the junta has been and continues to engage in various crimes against humanity and other atrocity crimes against its public, against its people. Certainly for the future of Myanmar, these types of accountability processes, not just for the Rohingya, but for the other victims, is essential for truth, for justice, for accountability, and for reconciliation. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Well, thank you all very much. We have about a half hour left in the session. I wanted to underscore a few points. First, it is an unusual setting to have so many women's voices. I think that the discussion where everyone had much more to say than they had time allowed to say it, brought out some of the reasons why people emphasize the need to have women's voices, but also to have the voices of people who are directly involved. So I think that that is very much a feature of the discussion this morning, and I thank you for the courage and for the witness of what you have presented to us. So, and particularly this women's story, the impact of the crisis on people's lives. The fact that we've heard again and again that these are human beings with a specific identity, the dignity issue came out again and again. I think it's also been an interesting discussion, hearing it across all of the four speakers, the theme of justice and fairness and the need for accountability through whatever mechanisms exist. And in a sense, I'm always impressed by a comment by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in a speech that he never gave, sort of, when in a crisis, pull any lever. Essentially, you use all of the tools that you have. I think yesterday and today, there's a call both to deal with the immediate issues with whatever tools we have, but much more to have a constant strategic look at what are the longer term solutions and how does one reach for them. There are the three classic solutions to refugee issues, which are part of the mandate of the UNHCR and of the academic and simple logic, which is, first of all, that the refugees are able to go back to where they came from, but there's always the but. What are the circumstances? Secondly, that they basically stay, and tragically, we're facing a situation in the world where the average length of time that refugees are in limbo is getting longer and longer. So it's over 20 years now, is the average length of time. A few years ago, it was 17 years, which was horrific. And then the third is that there is a solution that involves integration in other countries. In other words, basically accepting, for better or for worse, that the return and the status quo are not acceptable. So in many ways, that was a topic that clearly came out as on people's minds. But I think one of the most forceful comments that came out was that the current situation, the status quo, is dangerous, deteriorating, and unacceptable. With the raw issue of hunger, the insecurity, and violence. And I think the issue that came back again and again is the lack of education, and thus this reality of a lost generation or generations, and the teenagers without education contributing to the hopelessness and to the violence. So this education and security, I think, even in an unacceptable situation, came out as a priority. I think another piece in the idea of repatriation, that there is a tendency to throw up one's hands and basically give up. That the civil war, the tensions within Myanmar, Burma, is such that it's very difficult to foresee a situation where the minimum conditions of repatriation are in immediate prospect. So that is, I think, but that's debatable. And I think we hear from Wei that it's not acceptable to accept that as a reality. And then on the reintegration, which makes, of course, very logical sense from many perspectives, we heard yesterday very worrying comments about the deterioration in attitudes of host communities and of the Bangladesh community as a whole. So those are sort of the realities that confront this effort, and then the difficulties of both the geopolitical situation, where there are double standards, refocusing on other crises. Sudan has all of a sudden become the crisis of the day, not to speak of Ukraine, etc. And the reduction in humanitarian funding, which is a critical issue. So that's sort of the situation that I think we we at least were able to define it, and you've seen the elements of it in the presentations this morning. So with that, I have also spoken plenty, but let's see, first of all, if there are comments that some of the panel would like to make, or I dread to say some comments that you wished you'd made but didn't have time. So let's start with that and then see from the people in our listening audience who would like to take. So I see Wei Wei already has a comment.
Yeah, I mean, there has been a lot of urgencies and situations that we have discussed in Bangladesh yesterday. But however, situations in Burma is also extremely urgent and deteriorating day by day. The brutal acts of juntas against its people. And one of the issues that Razia has highlighted is the use of rape. So in 2016 and 17, the military raped women during the clearance operations. There has been like a cultural or traditional practice of rape against the Rohingya women over the past 2 decades, but it was a more intense practice of sexual violence, rape, gang rape, and mutilation during the incident itself. It was security forces raping the Rohingya women. But now they take that to another level, another step. It's not just that they are raping the women across the country, not only just Rohingya women, but also forcing detainees to rape each other. So the scenario that Khala Razia has highlighted, in the detention center, the security forces are like forcing the detainees, like men and women, to rape each other, and again, there are many incidences that we have documented. Our organization has documented across Burma. There are incidences, and it has also been published. There was one journalist who disclosed this issue. They were even forcing like male-to-male rape against each other, and they were blindfolded. And all of these tactics are so brutal and horrific and unimaginable. And I think this is also this is also somehow the military is further emboldened to really become more brutal than they were in the past because of the impunity. So I think I'm just reminded this, and we should not forget about this. And Rohingya in general are being persecuted in many levels, including the arrest. And Women's Peace Network has actually documented at least 3,100 people, not 1,100, 3,100 people have been arrested since the coup and sentenced to 2 to 5 years imprisonment.
One other comment that I should make that I think didn't come out as clearly this morning as it did yesterday is the appreciation for the role that Bangladesh has played, the generosity in welcoming over decades people, but also the penalty that it's causing. Because with the reduction in humanitarian aid, in one way or another, that means the burden goes on to Bangladesh because people need to eat and it increases the security risks. So I think that the role that Bangladesh plays and its possibility for playing more creative roles, more insistent roles in looking for sustainable solutions through diplomatic, through storytelling, etc., is an important feature. So with that, are there others on the panel who would like to comment, or are there questions or comments from our audience? Yes. Let's start in the back.
Yeah, my name is Dawood. I have been a refugee myself for almost like 18 years or so in Pakistan. My question would be situated in the political center, and we have a similar situation in Afghanistan right now. Different, but there are problems. but we don't have any central authority, and we only have OIC, right? When it comes to Burma, there's a religious authority that a lot of people respect, the Dalai Lama. Has he played any role? Do people look up to his input in this? Because we all come to the US, we in DC, and all of us want justice, and all of us want that from the US. And I think alone from the US, it's very difficult. So I'm just trying to see what other channels are there that actually help these crises.
I'm going to throw that to Arslan, because I think that one of the realities of the refugee crisis is we don't know the numbers. As far as I know, I asked UNHCR what the latest was. We don't know the percentage of Muslims who are refugees, but at one point it was at least 60%. And it does mean, and you emphasized the role of the OIC in its commitment and support. But I think the question is both for the OIC, but also more broadly to others. And we can also, it might even fall to me, or I don't know if I have a colleague in the room who could deal with the Catholic Church and Religions for Peace, which I think we have had ourselves some connection with.
Right. The 60% figure is globally?
Globally.
Okay, yeah. Well, certainly I think there are many religious actors, and the OIC is not a religious actor. It's a political organization, it's an international organization. So there's a religious element in terms of its organizational core, but it's actually a political body. But I think many religious leaders and figures are very active in working on the issue of refugees. And in terms of Buddhism, you mentioned the Dalai Lama. I think that I'm not an expert on Buddhism. Maybe someone on the panel can speak to it better. But I think the influence of the Dalai Lama in terms of the Buddhism in Myanmar is a bit different, perhaps. And I think that there are many, certainly there are many Buddhist monks in Myanmar who have been sadly supportive of various acts of violence against the Rohingya. And have connections with the regime and the junta in a way that's meant to give support to them. So it's very complicated in that sense. But certainly, as Catherine mentioned, and I think she can pick up on this, there are many international religious figures who certainly care about the situation of refugees globally and have been advocates for not only the rights of refugees, but also for humanitarian assistance for them.
Religions for Peace has focused quite a bit on the Myanmar Rohingya situation. It's been a central focus of several people. They had a forum which really involved efforts to engage. I also know about the International Network of Engaged Buddhists with its headquarters in Thailand, which again has very much a grassroots strategy because, as Weiwei was emphasizing, this is a problem of the society. I think you also mentioned it, Adina, that this is not simply the military. It is a much broader issue of religious and ethno-nationalism, which seems to be inflamed by deliberate political interventions. And it is one of the questions that we at the Berkeley Center in our refugee project are focusing on most sharply, which is what is the religious dimension? As we know, this is not a religious problem, essentially, but it has religious elements, and the responsibility of the religious leadership to reshape the discourse and to be the witness, to speak truth to power, but also to seek that fundamental shift is one that we're all looking to. Where is that leadership coming from? So I thank you for your question. Does anyone else want to comment on that?
Just 1 minute, yeah. I don't know. It's interesting that you mentioned the Dalai Lama. I think he has been quite silent. As far as I can see, he has been very quiet about this issue, which is already taking a stand. to think about it. I think the problem here is that Buddhism has been really tied with nation making and nationalism in Sri Lanka, in a little bit in Thailand, but most certainly historically since the Second World War in Myanmar. And that's, so it's never just religion, as we know. But it's state making and nation making has been very much through Buddhism, right? And perhaps, I don't know, I can't say that the Dalai Lama has done anything.
I actually, so, like, I guess just to be open about this, Dalai Lama is, Buddhism in Burma and the practice of Buddhism in Tibet is different. So it's a Mahayana for the Tibetan communities, and in Burma it's Theravada. So basically, he doesn't have a lot of influence over Burmese Buddhist society, although he's considered as one of the Buddhist leaders. And he actually made a few comments at the beginning of the crisis, and he actually sent a letter to the Aung San Suu Kyi. So, but he wasn't responded, and I think he didn't feel like he was respected. His voice was respected. So ever since he wasn't like making too much comments about it. So, but yes, Buddhism itself play a lot in the society because the state actually created Buddhism as a prominent religion of the country. Therefore, therefore, the military has systematically been using this Buddhism on their favor to promote their popularity and by promoting Buddhist supremacy. And this is one of the underlying factors that how the division has escalated over time among the Buddhist and other religions, not just against the Muslim, but also other religions. But with that being said, there are some religious leaders in the country who try to fix these problems and try to promote peace. However, they were targeted, attacked, or even killed. Some of the Buddhist monks involved in promoting peace building were actually killed by the military recently during the pro-democracy movement, and it's been devastating. So people, Buddhist monks who are outspoken, and they had to like self-censor themselves, and Buddhist monks who align with the military leaders got promoted in the Buddhist monasterial positions. And they got favored, and they basically use these monks to remobilize, continue to use these monks to mobilize the society, and which is extremely dangerous, and I think which is a great focus that we need to pay attention. Ali?
First, the disclaimer. My comments are of my own. It does not represent AIBS since this is co-sponsored by AIBS, and I do have the honor to lead AIBS. So this is my personal comment. One of the things that seems to be today's conversation might have overlooked or glossed over is the geopolitical aspect of this crisis, which we have discussed at length yesterday. The crisis that we are witnessing, it is not exactly completely a domestic issue, or despite the fact it has been long time in making within Myanmar. The 2017 happened because of the growing importance of the region called Indo-Pacific, particularly the economic interest of both India and China in the areas that is largely inhabited by Rohingya population. So there is a land grab issue that Professor Dina Siddiqui has alluded to. But most importantly, what we are witnessing is the aggressive policy of China, and the other elephant in the room is the role of Bangladesh. With respect to the Bangladesh's magnanimity in hosting 1.1 million, we must also take into account that instead of pursuing a multilateral effort to repatriation, the bilateral agreement that was signed in 2017-18, which did not actually help the Rohingya community because there is no guarantee to it. Uh, Particularly, the wording itself does not recognize Rohingyas as a community. That has been done. And that has created, as a matter of fact, in my personal opinion, that has created more roadblocks than actually facilitated the process. Similarly, what we are seeing right now, as we speak, there is an effort prodded by China with respect to, somehow put even not a band-aid. I would not call it a band-aid. Band-aid has more importance in case of owns. Less than 2,000 people being considered to be repatriated. The way it is being planned and it is being projected as if this is a solution and a process of solution. I can assure you, and anyone doing a very basic math, which I'm very bad at, 2,000 people, if you start with that, how many years does it take for 1.1 million people to be repatriated? As I said, I'm so bad in math, I cannot do it, but definitely it takes 100 years or so, 200 years or so. All these things are done because of this geopolitical importance of the region and China's interest in keeping that. I'm not exonerating other countries, Japan, or for that matter, United States and others. We keep on talking about, despite the fact that U.S. has taken steps, the largest donors, so to speak, with respect to the refugees. But a political solution is the solution that is needed. Humanitarian efforts are necessary for the immediate one, but a long-term solution cannot be found without having a political approach to it. And that is what seems to be missing in the conversation within Bangladesh. Again, thanks to the magnanimity of Bangladeshi community, which is now turning in a different direction. But the point that needs to be reiterated with respect to the Myanmar, the Rohingya refugee crisis, that a political solution which involves the political system within Myanmar, we cannot escape that fact. And we cannot escape the fact that a geopolitical importance of this region and external actors, for example, China, Russia, and to a certain extent Japan, not to mention India, which has been very much at the forefront, Caladon Project and others that we know of. So the economic interest and the interest of the influencing the region having their presence has encouraged and very aggressively by China, India, and others. These are the issues that cannot be simply glossed over or not taken into account. We have seen it came back again and again in yesterday's conversation because that is what it is. So I just want to add and put it on the table that this is not our intention, and at least to my understanding, the participants of the yesterday and today, by all means, I think this is not their intention to completely shut that part off, because otherwise this recording might actually give that impression that we are simply escaping or just not taking into account that one. So I just wanted to put it on the table. This is not a question to any of the participants. I just thought that we need to put it on the table so that, particularly given that this video would be viewed, hopefully millions, if not at least 100. It's a wide range, but there should be a record to that. This is, again, disclaimer, I represent myself, not AIBS, on this position. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a very helpful amplification, which was touched on, the issues of the geopolitical situation and all of this polarization, the shift towards Asia, the Asia tilt, the importance of leadership. I think that when we talk about politics, we're also talking about leadership, and the issues of economic interests, which Dina and others directly and indirectly were referring to. So let's take two questions because we're coming to the end. So you first.
Yep. So I would like to add one thing. I think somewhat missing in the discussion yesterday and today, that we have discussed the regional dimensions and the role of the actors. But in my view, we also need to look at what's happening in Bangladesh, because it's being an integral part of the crisis, how Bangladesh is responding and what's going on in the policy arena. And we discussed personally at a personal level that the coherent strategy missing at the policy level, and pretty much like ad hoc responses. We know that the refugee crisis is a tragic incident, but it also gave some political dividend to the regime when it was facing the legitimacy crisis at home and internationally. So the refugee crisis gave some sort of legitimacy to the regime, but it also created a scenario when the regime, as you all know, that it has the democratic reversal, democratic decline. So it didn't actually, and still not focusing too much on resolving the crisis and taking initiative itself. It's too much reliant on the regional actors like India and China and the USA. So in absence of a very strong, coherent strategy at home, it's like finding solutions elsewhere. And because of its internal thrust of the survival of the regime, it's not focusing on the big picture that is the best interest of the country. So that's the missing link. I think that I was going to add.
Let's have
Thank
one more comment, question, and then I'll give each of you a minute.
Thank you very much, Catherine. This was a fascinating discussion. I have 3 points. And the first point is just a personal note. I'm often considered as a very sarcastic person. From my own sarcasm, thankfully, Bangladesh doesn't have a third neighbor. If we had a third neighbor, probably we would have been debating another kind of refugee situation. If you look at India, for an example, National Registry of Citizenship, it was all about Bangladesh. If you read the Citizenship Amendment Act, it's for the first time Bangladesh has been labeled inside the domestic law, in which we are considered as a minority prosecuting country. And thankfully, it's a Bay of Bengal, hence nobody's coming from Bay of Bengal to really put us into trouble. That's one side of the story. The second side of the story, the verification that we've been talking about, only 10% of verification has been done. So 90% verification is not there. And what is very important is that this leaves out two critical demographic elements. The first is the newborns. The second is the orphans. Now, Myanmar has never, ever showed any kind of interest in really verifying the orphans that we have in the camps. So this is a big population that will be coupling in future. The third important factor, which is, I think, 969 movement. If you remember, the July 1st, 2013 Time magazine, the cover was the face of Buddhist terrorism. So it's not new. Only that the junta knew how to use it for the purpose of their own ethnic interest, ethno-nationalist or ethno-religious interests. So therefore, that's going to be there for a long, long time to come, as long as the Bamar identity continues to be a dominant identity. The fourth important element that we often try to forget, I mean, the whole integration, reintegration debate is extremely important. As I said yesterday, probably this is something we will be debating in the coming decades if we don't find a political solution to this particular crisis. And the problem with that particular narrative is that we are actually, the moment we talk about integration or reintegration, is legitimizing genocide. because by saying that we now have an escape route, by saying that, okay, let's integrate these people and forget about the rest of the problem. But that actually allows Myanmar to think, okay, hold on, we have a solution to that. I agree that 20%, 20 years average. And that's why yesterday I was also saying it's only 5 years, 6 years. I mean, when I use the term only, because I get to see that what's happening in the rest of the world. So we have to have patience to really get this. Another aspect that we often forget, I mean, humanitarian assistance is very much there. What about the humanitarian intervention is also, and I might sound super radical, Machiavellist, realist, but certainly, I mean, at some point of time, if we don't provide education, I agree with Razia, and I said like, yes, there is a concern because the state thinks in a different way, but certainly education and education and education, along with gender empowerment, because it's the women and the children are the first victim of any kind of conflict situation, crisis situation. So therefore, we really have to think about the people who will have a political consciousness at some point of time. That's an organic cognitive behavior of a human being. So therefore, we really have to think about all these things in line with the international community, in line with the international politics, even if you think Machiavellian speaking here, but certainly Machiavelli exists. And the last point that I would strongly recommend, I mean, I take Weiwei's one point, which is, I think, fundamentally important, that ASEAN must understand two narratives. The first narrative, they should understand that the Rohingyas are the ASEAN population, not SAARC South Asian population. This is one fundamental narrative they should understand. And second, my neighbor has sent a Myanmar junta a Kilo-class, Russian-built Kilo-class submarine, when Bangladesh is actually often confronting tension, not in terms of hosting the people, but in terms of almost war escalation with the neighboring country. For the first time in history since 1971, what happens is then suddenly we get to see a Russian-built Kilo-class submarine going through our neighborhood. And that really is not a nice thing. So ASEAN should understand these politics of myopia, this politics of geopolitical interest on an ad hoc basis, and henceforth, Bangladesh's only problem, apologies for the term war, Bangladesh's problem with ad hoc responses is certainly going to not going to be very helpful in future. But I take it from Zakaria that we really need to have a very comprehensive plan of action in future. But till then, we certainly need international community to act on ASEAN, to act on regional institutions, and Weiwei's proposal that ASEAN should have some sort of rescue mechanism should be put forward through this platform. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're past time, but I'm going to ask if each of the panelists have one last word. And I'll start with you.
Just very quickly, just in response to what I said. Again, I think the NRC and the CAA, what you're seeing, yes, the NRC.
The crisis of the secular,
Huh?
rather. Crisis of secularism.
You could call it crisis. It's also a playing out of partition politics, right? And this division, and I think that's something that we also need to think about. And again, this can't really be an action point, but it is very clear that who belongs in India versus who belongs in Burma versus who belongs in Pakistan, in Bangladesh, is very much about how these borders have been drawn and redrawn. And that's precisely what we're seeing. And Bangladesh is right in the middle because, Rohingya, there have been, there's a lot of going back and forth that these national borders cannot contain in there. So that we really need to think about the way in which partition is still unfolding in Burma as well as in India, as well as in Bangladesh. So the second thing is the newborn orphans. It's very interesting. Myanmar stopped issuing birth certificates a long time ago, so obviously they're not going to recognize these. We have to find other ways of, making humans count, even if the state does not give out certificates. Humans are born, they shouldn't need. I mean, there's something there to really think about. And 969, you're absolutely right. These transnational networks of Buddhism and other things are something we have to take into account if we want to have, manage this situation. And finally, for the Bangladesh authorities and having this question about education versus security, I don't think it's such a black and white issue. If you have young kids trapped, jailed, really, there are real restrictions on their mobility. In a place with zero hope for the future, with zero education, you will have exactly what you're fearing, terrorism. You are going to produce the conditions, so you will have to find ways. If the Myanmar government doesn't want to teach in their language, or if we don't want to do it in Bangla, there's English. There are ways to figure things out rather than leaving people be in complete despair and in deteriorating conditions.
Yeah. As we're talking about verification for these kids and people in Bangladesh, one of the excuses that the Myanmar military has been giving over 2-3 decades is that these people origins are unknown, therefore we need to verify them. Although they were all citizens, they had Burmese citizenship card before 1982, and ever since around 1990s, there has been annual or biannual checkups against these people to every single village, especially in northern Rakhine state, right? So verification, the existence of the Rohingya populations is verified every year or every 6 months, and it is not a shortage of verification. But yet they give this excuse to further degrade their citizenship status and attempting or putting all their effort to provide this national verification card. Now, as we speak today, there's 20 Rohingya delegation visiting to Rakhine State, and the first thing the Burmese military is saying is that now we're issuing this national verification card as soon as you arrive here, and after that you will have more benefits. And this is what is the narrative from the beginning and continuations of the narrative by the military, not a change in appeal. So I think it's something that we have to know, and it is not the shortage of verification, but it is the political will of the Myanmar military and Myanmar as a whole. And lastly, I think we're not reaching the goal or ending this crisis because all the approaches are very responded to the crisis, right? It's not proactive, and all the approaches on the Rohingya crisis are ad hoc and a bit responsive. I don't know if I'm saying the right way, but it's not being proactive. And now that it is important to really, while we need to address the urgent situations, but really have a strategic, as you said, approach to the addressing root causes. It is not that we cannot start repatriation. Repatriation happened in 1978, 1991, and with the same very stakeholders. Why not now? It is the political will and political pressure.
Razia, last comment. Thank you again. Last comment for because we are all sitting there and we are arguing about the crisis, but we cannot find exactly the solution about the Rohingya issue. Yes, we declared that we need a solution, but where is the solution? My question is, this is now the 6th year. It's a long time, and we are just sitting and yes, there's the ICC process, IIIM, and Bangladesh's success in ICC, ICJ, IIIM, even in the fact finding. But diplomat always is failed because there some maybe intention, also lack of expertise. When anything conversation about the repatriation about the Rohingya issue in Bangladesh,
we didn't see any expertise who can give actual advice. Even Bangladesh have to consider our leaders who are diaspora. We have so many expertise also. And last month, one of NGO, they are ready to research about the history by them, and they are not consulting any historian, even not a professor. So this is happening in Cox's Bazar, name of project, name of process, but the real issue is never here. How can we improve this community? Not only improving our research, we have to find a solution. If we cannot find, it's not only Bangladesh issue, it's a regional. And these people, we are, in the 3 years ago, I told that we are creating criminals if we are not giving them chance about education or involvement in any skill development. But now it is becoming true because youth are now involved in crime. Small, but today small, and easily they can buy, and easily they can use by whatever. I don't have to express. But if anything happens, it all goes to Rohingya terrorists. The rumor is going on there. But actually, what we know better than you, and we see the situation. This vulnerable community need a solution. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Arsenal, do you have a last word?
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say thanks, and just as a message, with all the crises that arise, Sudan now, Ukraine ongoing, I mean, I think it's important for all of us in our different areas of work to ensure that we're focusing on the Rohingya situation, focusing on Myanmar and Bangladesh, and working towards solutions.
Well, thank you all very much. Thank you to this wonderful panel, and to all of you who've listened intently to the dialogue. I think we all are very committed to a continuing conversation and a continuing effort to deal both with the immediate aspects of the crisis, but also with pushing ourselves towards the longer term solution. The video, I don't know when it will be available, quite soon, will be on the websites of AIBS and of the Berkeley Center, and we encourage you to stay in touch. Thank you all so much.